Okay, picking up where we left off on page 341, we're talking about one of the factors when you're evaluating a hard drive is access time, how fast that little guy can move. And the other one is its transfer rate, which typically talks about how many RPM, revolution per minute, the disks are spinning. There's lots of other things you can do, but those are two major factors. Now, one of the cool things they talked about on page 343, they have this little diagram. They show, in reality, the spaces between the platter and the head is incredibly small. So imagine that this is the spinning platter down here, and this is the read-write head, the thing that moves. So they have a chunk of metal here where, you know, there's like a magnet. And the spaces are incredibly small. You know, a dust particle or a human hair is magnitudes bigger than that little gap. And so these things have to be built in a clean room. So these guys are perfectly sterile. There's no dirt. There's no dust anywhere. Now, let's think about this for just a minute. Did you know that all of these types of hard drives have an altitude limit? Okay. So this is a Western Digital drive. It has an altitude limit of 10,000 feet. Now, why would that be? Why would they matter if I'm on top of a mountain or at Death Valley? Why would that matter? Well, it's this little gap right here. I mean, essentially there's air underneath this read-write head, right? That sucker is spinning really, really fast. And there's a cushion of air in here. And as you get higher and higher and higher, the cushion of air gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And you could actually mess things up because it's calibrated to be exactly that depth. And if it ain't that depth, it's going to have a problem. And so, for example, now, admittedly, if you're in an airplane, most airplane cabins are pressurized to 8,000 feet, so you're okay to use that. But, you know, you're taking your laptop on to, you know, climb Mount Everest or something, yeah, you're probably going to have a problem. Your hard drive is probably going to crash because this read-write head is going to physically touch the platter, and if it ever physically touches the platter while it's spinning, that hard drive is toast. So, interesting little fact, huh? That hard drives have an altitude rating. Okay, let's continue. All right. So, talk about, you know, one of the other things that you can do to speed up a hard drive is to have additional cache. It's some memory that sits on your hard drive. So I'm sending it a whole chunk of data, and it's saying, wait, let me get to the right spot. So with the buffer, it can say, fine, send it on down, and give it a couple of milliseconds to find the right spot, and then it'll start writing to the correct location. So once again, this is a 2 terabyte drive, and it has 32 megabytes of cache, which is halfway decent size. Now, the more cache, the more expensive the drive is, and the higher rated drives are. So once again, it's not unheard of to have 64 meg or more on an enterprise rated drive. Particularly the larger they get, the more cache they end up having. Okay, so that's the third thing that makes hard drives faster. So access time, RPM, and the buffer. There's actually a fourth one, and that is the mechanical transfer rate. But the transfer rates are typically limited by like the IDE cable or the SATA cable or the USB cable or the SCSI cable. In other words, it's typically not the hard drive that's the limiting factor, so I'm going to kind of skip that one. Okay, on page 343 they talk about RAID. And RAID has two definitions depending on who you ask. It could be a redundant array of independent disks, RAID, or it could be redundant array of inexpensive disks. And both abbreviations are perfectly valid. And what it basically means is I have a handful of hard drives left over, and you know, I got a whole closet full of these guys. And so I think, well, wait, in order for me to use them all, wouldn't it be kind of cool if I could just bolt these guys together? If I could get, like, in my closet, I got 5 small 200 meg hard drives. Can I, like, bolt them together somehow? So I had 5 times 200, it'll give me, you know, a terabyte worth of data. Can I do that? Well, you can using RAID. RAID is a technique, you know, takes hardware and software to make it work, but hardware and software together in a combination allows me to combine multiple disks together to make it look like it's one big giant disk. Kind of cool. And we'll come back to this in a little bit more detail in just a moment. Okay. The next thing you're talking about is external hard drives. Now, I kind of already showed you that you can make any internal hard drive external by just getting one of those little docks. They're dirt cheap. Now, I also have one of these guys. This is an external hard drive. This one is a 1 terabyte hard drive from Seagate, and it's got a USB 3 connector. So I can walk up to a laptop, plug this guy in and do a backup of the laptop onto this guy and then run off with it. And so external hard drives, and they have bigger ones than this, physically larger ones than this, and they have obviously smaller ones than this. So external hard drive is a separate freestanding storage device that connects with a cable to a USB port or some other port. And if you get one of the newer ones, there's enough power going through the USB cable to spin the drive. Now, in the older ones, you might have had an extra little power connector stuck on here. So you had a USB port, but it may be, the drive just drew too much power to suck power through the cable. So you had an extra little doodad to plug in, so it plugged into the wall. But newer drives are much, much more energy efficient, so that's rarely the case now. On page 345, they talk about flash memory. And those are the kind of chips that it uses a special type of memory, but it's non-volatile memory. And it's configured to not operate like primary storage, RAM. It's designed to look like and act like a storage device, a hard drive, for example. And they talk about solid-state disks. So this is a half a terabyte solid-state disks, and typically they're relatively small. Okay, this one is small enough to fit into a laptop or big device. Doesn't really matter. So let's go through the advantages here. Now, the first advantage they talk about is the capacity, and I've kind of got a problem with that. And that is, the capacities for these guys are nowhere near you can't buy a 4 terabyte one of these guys. Well, okay, maybe you could if you were, the sultan of something and had a gazillion dollars. But ordinary people cannot buy a 4 terabyte solid state disk. Now, you can go down to electronics store and buy a 4 terabyte hard drive. Cost you a couple $100 and you're done. It would cost you I'm making these numbers up, but it would cost you, $10,000 for a 4 terabyte one of these guys. So the capacities are nowhere near the capacity of a traditional hard drive. The access time, remember we talked about access time? There's no moving parts here. So there's no motor, stepping motor moving the head. So there's no moving the head. That means the access time on this is microscopic. So 10 millisecond access time for a hard drive, and we're talking, and that's kind of a best case scenario. These guys are like, less than 1 millisecond, way, way less, like a tenth of a millisecond less. The next one, talk about the transfer. So the disk transfer rates. This guy doesn't really need that much buffer. He could have buffer. This one does not, but he could have some buffer in here, and because it can handle the stuff because there's no latency. When you ask for something to be written to the disk, it doesn't have to say, wait a minute, let me catch up, because there's no catching up to do. So access time makes the transfer rates go up. It's very quiet. There's no moving parts. I don't hear it. I don't hear any click, click, click. I don't hear any spin. It's very durable because, once again, there's no moving parts. So no moving parts means I can knock on this guy and no problems at all. It also means that I can take this to Mount Everest. So the next time I go to Mount Everest, I'm going to use solid-state drives because they're going to work regardless of the altitude. Okay, they're very lightweight. These guys don't weigh much. There's plastic. There's some printed circuit card in here, but let me give you an example. I've got we're going to be talking about one of these enclosures called a NAS box, and so I've got an enclosure with 6 drives in it, and that thing is deceptively heavy. When you reach over to pick it up, it's about the size of a toaster, and you think, oh well, it's just a little box. You reach over and you go, because these hard drives are packed full. Those suckers are heavy. compared to these guys, I mean, regardless of the size, I'm talking about just the density. These guys are very, very lightweight. And because they're very low power, they don't produce hardly any heat. You don't need any cooling, so I don't hear it. I don't feel it. Perfect for a laptop or a small storage device like a tablet because it's very lightweight, doesn't consume hardly any power, no heat, thin. You know, I can't fit that in a tablet, but I can fit that in a tablet. Okay. So, and there's some debate on the long life of one of these guys. So, these guys are typically about the same life span as one of these guys. The problem is these guys have an eventual failure rate. I mean, if you bought a hard drive today and put it in use, you know, you're basically just going to have to plan for it to fail in 6 years. I mean, that's just kind of sort of the golden rule for hard drives. These guys, we haven't quite got there yet, so we don't really know, because they produce new ones every 6 months, and so no one's had one for longer than that. But in theory, these guys could outlast the storage capacity of the storage length of the older drives. Okay, so let's continue. So next we're talking about just flash memory in general. So once again, if I crack this guy open, it's going to look like this. It's going to have a series of little chips. And so the chips are where everything is stored. That is the hard drive storage. That's the media. And then a little storage controller, which is a very powerful little computer inside this little box. And of course, these guys could be external and or external just like this. Okay, cool. Next, we talk about memory cards. And memory cards, of course, are things like that fit into your camera. These itty-bitty little guys. It uses kind of sort of the same technology. I mean, it does have a memory controller of a sort, and it does have some sort of this flash memory of a sort. But the little memory cards are not really designed to be incredibly fast. That was not what their intent was. You know, this was built with performance in mind in every respect. You know, transfer rate and access time and all that stuff. Performance. You buy one of these guys if you want to speed your system up, okay? Not so with the memory card technology. The transfer rates are okay, and the storage capacities are okay, but they're just microscopic. I mean, tiny things about the size of your thumbnail. But, hey, they're pretty cool. And they talk about all different kinds. There's a compact flash, and there's an SDHC and the SDX8. You know, there's all these little alphabet soup of all these kinds. So if you got a new camera or a new tablet, you need to find out what kind you got. The micro SD seems to be the ones that everyone's using in phones because it's physically the smallest one, and phones are relatively small. So a micro SD card, and they have a different type of a high density version called a micro SDHC, high capacity, and it just has additional interfaces to make it go a little bit faster. Okay, and support larger sizes. Okay, so they talk about XD picture cards. Those were kind of big at one time. I don't see those much anymore. I mean, they were basically just for cameras. Memory sticks and all those kind of things. And I used to have one that had a memory stick, and then you had a little converter you plugged it into, and then you plugged into another converter, and oh geez, it was pretty wild. Okay, so flash memory exists, and it exists serves another purpose. Flash memory chips, these guys, are designed for physically small, physically light, and not for performance. That was not their goal. Okay, so this is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.